The shepherd stands transfixed as savage lions circle the wounded horse, jaws parted in silent threat. With his heart pounding, he steps forward, uncertain if he can save them both. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The scorching sun hung high over the African savannah, painting the tall grass in shades of gold and copper. A warm breeze stirred the silence, sweeping across the plains in gentle waves. Far from any well-trodden path, a forgotten horse stood alone, ribs pressing against its dusty hide. Its saddle, torn and caked with dry mud, revealed that it had once belonged to someone who cared for little beyond utility. Now abandoned and weak, it had wandered for days, searching for water among thorny shrubs and brittle weeds. Unbeknownst to this weary creature, danger lurked in every direction. It had no clue that, hidden behind the tall grasses, a pride of lions prowled closer, drawn by the scent of a vulnerable meal. A low growl rumbled from behind a cluster of acacia trees. The horse's ears twitched, alerted by a shift in the wind that carried the faint odor of predators. Trembling on frail legs, it turned its head, peering across the endless sea of grass. With each ragged breath, the horse felt a deeper sense of dread. Memories of its past life flickered, a stable yard, a rider with impatient hands, but those scenes seemed distant, almost dreamlike. Here, under the relentless sun, the only reality was survival. And though its spirit wavered, the horse clung to a final shred of hope. Suddenly, a flash of tawny fur emerged to the left. One lioness, sleek and muscular, crept forward, joined by two younger lions who imitated her stealth, their golden eyes locked on the trembling horse. The horse attempted to move away, hooves stumbling in the loose earth. But the predators advanced with methodical patience, cutting off any chance of escape. A cloud passed over the sun, draping the scene in fleeting shadow, as if nature itself anticipated the grim outcome. Then, from a distance, a faint sound broke the tension, a whistle that carried strangely across the stillness of the plains. The lions paused, ears perked. The whistle repeated, sharper this time. From beyond a ridge, a shepherd in simple robes emerged, guiding a small flock of goats. His presence was as unexpected as a sudden rainfall in this arid land. Lean and weathered by the sun, he clutched a slender staff in one hand, while his other hand cupped around his mouth to produce that piercing call. There was something in his stance, in the way he regarded the circle of lions and the desperate horse, that suggested he was not merely passing by. He was here with a purpose. Without hesitation, the shepherd approached. The goats hesitated behind him, bleating nervously at the sight of the lions, but he guided them to a safer spot behind a cluster of thorny bushes. Then, with firm steps, he advanced toward the ring of predators. The leading lioness bared her teeth, unsure whether to stand her ground or yield to this unfamiliar intruder. The shepherd raised his staff, striking it against a stone. The sharp crack reverberated through the air, causing the younger lions to twitch their tails. For a moment, the horse blinked in confusion, uncertain whether to fear him or trust him. In the hushed standoff, the shepherd did the unthinkable. He reached into a worn leather pouch at his belt and withdrew a handful of dried fruit. With slow, deliberate movements, he tossed a piece toward the lioness. Startled, she snarled but stopped advancing. The other lions eyed the morsel curiously. It was an odd gesture, an offering that momentarily disrupted their hunger-driven focus on the horse. Several seconds passed in tense silence before the lioness stepped forward and sniffed the fruit. While she pondered this strange scenario, the shepherd inched closer to the horse, his voice low and reassuring. "Easy now," he murmured, slowly extending a palm toward the horse's muzzle. The terrified animal quivered under his touch. Its nostrils flared, catching the scent of goat and dust on the shepherd's tunic. In that moment, the horse recognized something different about this man. His hands did not tighten on reins, his eyes did not gleam with cruelty. Instead, there was warmth. The lions, distracted by the unusual offering, still hovered, but they hesitated to strike. One by one, they circled around the pair, tails swishing in agitation. Each second felt like an eternity suspended in the sweltering afternoon heat. Then came a sudden roar from the oldest male lion, who stood back from the pride. He appeared to be the patriarch, scarred from years of dominance. His bellow echoed across the plains, sending a shiver through the flock of goats hidden nearby. The shepherd's heart pounded, but he refused to show fear. Instead, he allowed the horse to lean against him as it fought the urge to collapse. Calmly, he placed his hand on the horse's neck, feeling the frantic thud of its pulse. The lions parted, almost making way for their alpha as he strode closer. Tension thickened the air. The shepherd breathed slowly, focusing on the trembling animal at his side rather than the massive lion nearing them. He remembered stories shared among nomads, tales of ancient bonds between humble shepherds and the wild. Some said that in lands forgotten by time, man and beast could forge fleeting truces. Whether these legends held truth or not, the shepherd felt compelled to try. He raised his staff again, not as a weapon, but as a sign of authority, tapping its end on the ground. Dust swirled upwards, forming a faint haze around his worn sandals. The alpha lion halted, peering at the shepherd with an intense gaze. A hush fell, as if the entire savannah held its breath. Minutes stretched like hours while man, lion, and horse shared the same dusty stage. Then, with a slow blink, the lion turned his head. A flick of his tail signaled the others. One by one, the lionesses stepped back. The younger males followed, their curiosity not yet satisfied, but their leader's will was clear. The threat began to dissolve, leaving behind a wary peace. In the distance, the goats bleated, sensing a shift in the winds. Relief coursed through the shepherd, though he kept his composure. Softly, he laid a reassuring hand on the horse's withers. The animal's flanks heaved, exhaustion evident in every labored breath. Filthy and neglected, it bore scars that hinted at harsh treatment from its previous owner. The shepherd remembered his own childhood when he, too, felt discarded by those who deemed him worthless. Perhaps that sense of empathy fueled his courage now. Gathering the horse's frayed reins, he guided it slowly away from the lions, offering hushed words of comfort. Every step was a victory against the fate it had nearly met. Under the watchful eyes of the pride, he led the horse to a sparse waterhole nearby. The shepherd's goats gathered around, anxious yet obedient, as he knelt to let the horse drink. Desperation surfaced in the horse's eyes, but it managed a few gulps before its legs buckled in sheer fatigue. Quickly, the shepherd eased it down, murmuring soft, rhythmic sounds that echoed his own heartbeat. Around them, the lions observed in silence, no longer seeing a struggling prey but a curious spectacle of compassion. Even the alpha lion, still perched at a distance, lowered himself onto his haunches, acknowledging a momentary truce. For the shepherd, this battered creature deserved more than pity. It deserved a second chance at life. With gentle determination, he resolved to care for it in whatever way he could, though he had few resources of his own. In this vast and often merciless land, he understood that every living soul yearned for respect. And in that decision, he planted a seed of harmony, one fragile spark that, for an afternoon at least, bridged the gap between predator and prey. Hope blossomed. The horse's eyes fluttered, half closed with exhaustion, as the shepherd examined every scrape along its thin flanks. Determined to do what he could, he rubbed down the horse's coat with a rough cloth moistened in the shallow waterhole. Filth and dried sweat peeled away in dark streaks, revealing patches of raw skin that made the shepherd's stomach knot. To think someone had once saddled this animal, only to discard it in the wild, weighed heavily on his mind. But dwelling on such cruelty wouldn't solve the present predicament. The horse needed rest, nourishment, and a safe place to recover. One goat bleated, stepping forward to sniff at the horse's muzzle. It was an odd, tender moment in the hush of the midday heat. The horse twitched an ear, uncertain whether to spook or remain still. Meanwhile, the shepherd reached into his leather pouch to find any morsel of sustenance. He discovered a small handful of dried grains. Though meant for his own ration, he pressed them to the horse's lips in a gentle offering. The horse's cracked lips parted, tongue flicking out to sample the grains. It wasn't much, but it was enough to coax a faint spark of life back into its weary gaze. Once the horse had taken all it could manage, the shepherd surveyed the landscape. Many miles separated him from the nearest settlement. Evening would descend before long, and traveling in darkness on these plains was dangerous even for those who knew the land. He felt tension in every muscle, as if an invisible weight pressed down on him. He had a flock of goats to mind, a route he followed to ensure grazing, and now a severely debilitated horse to care for. The shepherd paused, setting a hand over his racing heart. Could he manage all of this alone? But the memory of those lions retreating in a remarkable display of forbearance emboldened him. Perhaps, he thought, this was all meant to be, a test of his compassion, or a sign from the hidden spirits of the savannah. Resolute, he rose to his feet and whistled softly for his goats to gather. Then he knelt once more beside the horse, pressing his forehead gently to the animal's neck. The horse didn't recoil. Together they drew a slow breath, as if forging a vow they would try to make it through the night. The trek began in slow, stumbling steps. The goats followed in a loose cluster, while the shepherd coaxed the horse forward with gentle clucks of his tongue. A scattering of birds took flight overhead, their shadows gliding across the ground. Each time the horse threatened to collapse, the shepherd paused, letting it rest. Against a hazy sky, the sun began its descent, painting the horizon with oranges and reds. Long shadows stretched across the grass. Although night was not far off, the shepherd clung to hope that a suitable place to camp lay just beyond the next ridge. After what felt like hours, he spotted a solitary acacia tree atop a small slope. The branches spread wide, forming a lacework of leaves that might offer enough shade to see them through until dawn. Exhausted, he led the horse beneath the tree. The goats, accustomed to the shepherd's rhythms, settled around them, nibbling at patches of sparse foliage. With careful hands, the shepherd removed the battered saddle from the horse, letting it drop to the ground. Underneath, the horse's skin bore ridges of old bruises and fresh sores. The shepherd's chest constricted at the sight. Who would do this to a creature that had likely once served faithfully? Darkness crept across the plains. From somewhere in the distance, a lone hyena giggled, its eerie call rising over the stillness. Instinctively, the shepherd shifted to keep the horse close, his staff within arm's reach. Though he could ward off smaller scavengers with a well-aimed blow or a shout, the horse's injuries made it all the more vulnerable. Yet as the stars emerged overhead, a sense of calm enveloped them. The tension of the day gradually receded, replaced by a silent bond woven through mutual need. By moonrise, the shepherd lit a small fire. Its crackling glow revealed deep lines in his face, the mark of a man who had spent a lifetime guiding animals across unforgiving terrain. The goats dozed, huddled together for warmth, while the horse rested on trembling legs. Occasionally, the shepherd rose to check on it, stroking its mane and whispering in a foreign dialect that spoke of reassurance. He recounted an old fable he had heard as a child about a brave stallion that saved its herd from a flood. "You will be strong again," he murmured. "You will run free." Dawn arrived in a gentle unveiling of pale light. Streaks of pink and violet brushed the horizon, and the cool morning air carried distant echoes of birds. The horse, though still weak, managed to stand on all four legs without swaying. Hope fluttered in the shepherd's chest. If it could just remain upright and drink a bit more water, perhaps it would endure another day. He climbed the slope with two goats, searching for a better vantage point. Scanning the plains, he spotted a glint, possibly a winding stream that snaked across a lower basin. Water would mean life, a chance to bathe the horse's wounds properly and refill his canteen. Returning to the group, he gathered his belongings and prepared to move on. The journey to the stream was arduous. The morning sun climbed steadily, beating down with renewed fervor. Each step cost the horse precious energy, and every pause brought the risk of losing momentum. The shepherd sometimes considered leaving the horse behind for the sake of his other animals. Yet each time the notion arose, the horse looked at him with dark, trusting eyes. So he pressed on. Eventually, the shimmering ribbon of water came into clearer view, flanked by patches of reeds. A sense of relief swept over him, fueling one final push. On the stream's muddy bank, the shepherd dropped to his knees, scooping water up for the horse to drink. Then he guided its muzzle downward. The horse lapped greedily, steam rising from its nostrils in the already sizzling air. After quenching its thirst, the shepherd set about tending its sores. He dabbed water over raw skin, softened dried blood, and checked for signs of infection. Although his supplies were limited, just scraps of cloth, a small pouch of herbs, his hands were steady and resolute. The horse quivered, flinching at times, but seemed to grasp that these efforts were aimed at healing. Overhead, an eagle circled, scanning the ground for prey. Everything else about the savannah was timeless. The rustle of wind through grass, the hum of insects, the faint cackle of distant hyenas. The shepherd, consumed with concern, barely noticed. Once he'd done all he could with the meager supplies, he let the horse rest in the shade of a scrubby tree. He gazed across the water's surface, lost in reflection. Could he bring this horse to a safer haven? Did such a place even exist? Growing up, he had heard whispers of a missionary outpost several days' walk from here, a modest refuge that sometimes cared for wounded animals. Yet he had never ventured there himself. His journeys spanned wide distances, but he avoided contact with large settlements. Life had taught him to trust only his goats and the rhythms of the wild. Perhaps, though, for the sake of this horse, he could make an exception. The day wore on, and he allowed the horse to graze on the sparse grass at the water's edge. Even the goats found enough greenery to nibble. The shepherd used the respite to soak strips of cloth, which he then draped over the horse's back to shield it from the worst of the sun. As afternoon shadows stretched, his goats began to wander. The call of their bells drifted on the breeze. The shepherd rose, beckoning them near with a gentle croon. Lethargic from the heat, they complied, trotting back toward him. Though he cared deeply for each goat, he sensed this horse required even more vigilance. Evening was fast approaching, and the memory of the lion pride still lingered. While they had let him pass unscathed before, he couldn't rely on perpetual mercy. In the final hours of daylight, he decided to push onward, seeking higher ground, where he could keep watch over the surroundings. The horse followed, head drooping with each step but not faltering. The shepherd marveled at the resilience hidden in its battered body. By the time they reached a rocky overlook, the sun was a molten orb dipping below the horizon. He saw no sign of lions, only the endless expanse of tall grass, stirring like ocean waves. Quietly, he led the animals beneath a rocky overhang that provided some shelter from potential predators. Then, lighting another small fire, he settled in for the night. Sleep came fitfully. The shepherd's mind wandered to the missionary outpost. Did people there truly care for injured beasts, or was that a rumor conjured by hopeful travelers? He stared at the horse, which lay curled on the ground, sides heaving. A pang of guilt twisted his chest. He could not abandon it now. Tomorrow, he resolved, he would head north, where rumor placed that safe haven. He was not sure how far it might be. Some said 1 day's travel, others 2, or even 3. Regardless, what choice did he have? When the morning light broke again, he roused himself. Cradling a goatskin water pouch, he offered the horse a drink. It snorted and took small sips, then managed to rise. The shepherd patted its flank. Though the horse still quivered under his touch, the dread he once sensed had softened. In the warm hush of dawn, an unspoken trust had formed between them. With a brisk gesture, he signaled the goats to move. They set forth, forging a path through tall grass that shimmered with dew. The journey north had begun, every footstep echoing with promise and risk. Ahead stretched unknown terrain. The shepherd tried to recall old tales from wandering traders about a narrow canyon, a place dotted with hidden watering holes. If they reached that canyon, perhaps they would find enough sustenance to keep the horse alive. As he walked, staff in hand, he hummed a song his grandmother had once taught him, a melody about courage in the face of an unforgiving desert. The horse's ears flicked as though listening. For the first time since their meeting, a flicker of curiosity lit the animal's gaze. It seemed to sense that beyond the hardships, something good might lie in wait. The rising sun slowly unveiled the savanna in soft blues and golds, revealing endless waves of tall grass that glimmered like a vast inland sea. Though the day had only just begun, a light haze shimmered on the horizon, hinting at the heat that would soon blanket the land. The shepherd led the way north, staff in hand, the battered horse trailing at a deliberate pace. Now and then the weary animal faltered, but an encouraging tug on the old reins spurred it on. The goats, more energetic and sure-footed, bounced between clumps of scrub, pausing to graze before trotting after their guardian. As they traveled, the shepherd's mind turned over fragments of old tales about the rumored missionary outpost. He wondered if he still recalled the path, or if the swirling dust of memory would fail him before they arrived. For most of the morning, the air was mercifully mild. The shepherd's breath mingled with the low bleats of his flock, creating a soothing chorus that steadied his nerves. Periodically, the horse would lift its head, nostrils flaring to test the wind as if expecting another sudden appearance of predators. But the land remained calm, no sign of movement beyond a few distant antelope bounding through the brush. The shepherd found comfort in these glimpses of routine wildlife, hoping such calm might signal a reprieve from the dangers they had recently escaped. With each passing hour, the landscape shifted. The terrain grew rockier in patches, forcing the shepherd to pick careful routes around thorny thickets. Flat expanses stretched between low hills, occasionally broken by clusters of wiry trees that offered scarce shade. When the sun hit its zenith, an unforgiving heat poured down, and the shepherd decided they must rest. He spotted a boulder wide enough to cast a sliver of shadow onto the hard ground. With gentle pats, he guided the horse there, urging it to lie down. Relieved, the horse sank to its knees, flanks heaving. The goats crowded close, pushing and shoving for space until the shepherd coaxed them aside. While the animals cooled, the shepherd rummaged in his pouch. He had only a handful of dried fruit left, plus the remainder of the grains he had hoped would sustain him on his return journey. Wincing with concern, he split the food among himself, the goats, and his equine companion, determined that no one would be left hungry if he could help it. There might be foraging opportunities ahead, but in the heart of the dry season, he could not rely on the savanna's generosity. The horse chewed slowly, muzzle caked in dust, eyes half closed. Something about its posture suggested a renewed will to survive, even if the body lagged behind. As the shepherd ate, his thoughts drifted back to the strange standoff with the lions. He pictured the alpha male's measured steps, the quiet departure that defied the usual law of predator and prey. It was almost as though a thin line of grace had been extended in that moment, an unspoken acknowledgement of his plea. The shepherd believed in signs, even if he rarely spoke of them aloud. Perhaps that event was a sign guiding him to press forward with this mission. The horse's scars spoke of cruelty, and he felt driven to make amends on behalf of those who had failed it. When the midday heat began to relent, the shepherd gathered his makeshift group and resumed the march. This time, the breeze was sharper, carrying dust that scratched at his eyes. He pulled a rag over his mouth, squinting against a gust that threatened to send his goats scattering. One goat bolted, startled by a swirl of sand, but the shepherd's whistle brought it back. The horse, too tired to spook, plodded along, trusting that where the shepherd led, water and rest would eventually follow. Step by step, they moved in unison. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge, revealing a broad valley tinted copper by the setting sun. In the distance rose a jagged range of rock formations shaped by centuries of wind and rain. The missionary outpost, if it truly existed, was rumored to lie somewhere beyond those jagged spires. The shepherd felt a twinge of hope. He recalled a traveling merchant who once spoke of a narrow pass that cut through those ancient rocks, leading to a place where travelers found aid. Perhaps with luck they would discover a trail marked by footprints or donkey tracks. Driven by that notion, he pressed onward down the ridge. Night soon began its steady approach. Colors drained from the sky, leaving behind purple shadows that stretched across the plains. A hush settled in, broken only by the distant cackle of hyenas. Determined not to be caught unaware, the shepherd searched for a defensible campsite. He spotted a natural hollow in the side of a low hill, a shallow depression with rocky edges that could shelter them from roaming predators. Though the ground was uneven, it felt safer than camping in the open. With careful steps, he led the horse inside, the goats streaming after him. The moment he set down his staff, weariness claimed him. It was a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind born of endless hours under the sun, tempered by constant vigilance. Yet he forced himself to remain alert a while longer. He coaxed the horse to drink from his last reserve of water. Then, using that same water, he dampened a cloth to cleanse the worst of the sores. Working by moonlight, he could only guess at the severity of some injuries, but the horse seldom flinched. It seemed resigned to his ministrations, leaning into his gentle touch. Occasionally, a goat wandered too close, curious, and the shepherd would shoo it away with a tired chuckle. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we'll make for those rocks. We'll find a path, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find someone who knows how to help you properly." His words fell into the hush, and though the horse could not speak, its eyes glinted with a recognition of his tone. The shepherd settled at last, nestling his back against a flat stone. The goats dozed in a cluster, lulled by the protective circle of rock. In the center of that makeshift camp, the horse rested, head low, as though any lingering fear had melted into cautious trust. Dawn arrived with a stinging wind that howled across the plains, rattling the sparse bushes. The shepherd roused to find a thin veil of dust coating his clothes. The goat stirred uneasily, bleating in complaint. Alarmed, he glanced at the horse, worried that the constant exposure to wind and dust might worsen its condition. Yet to his relief, the animal stood upright, blinking as if uncertain, but not altogether weak. He gave it another sip of water, lamenting how quickly their supply dwindled. They had to move faster. Gathering his courage, he climbed to the top of a small rise to scan the horizon. The jagged rock formations loomed closer than before, their contours stark against the sunrise. A thought flickered. If they reached the base of those formations by midday, they might find pockets of shade or even a hidden water source. He hurried back and signaled for the goats to follow. The horse's steps began with pronounced stiffness, as though each joint ached, but the shepherd continued offering soft murmurs of encouragement. They progressed for hours, forging a trail through clumps of grass that had turned brittle beneath the unrelenting sun. The dust-laden air stung their lungs, and every breath felt labored. Occasionally, the shepherd would spot a lone tree and steer them toward it, allowing the horse to nibble a few leaves. He watched the creature's eyes, checking for signs of confusion or despair. But though the horse's movements were slow, its gaze remained focused. That spark of will had not died. At midday, the towering rocks finally rose before them, massive pillars of weathered stone, some standing alone like silent sentinels. A narrow gorge cut through the center, promising a cooler path away from the direct sunlight. The shepherd paused at its entrance, scanning the eerie shadows. An unsettling hush enveloped the place, as though no breeze dared to blow within. Even the goats hesitated, stamping their hooves on the gravel. In the distance, a raven squawked, its call echoing along the canyon walls. Cautiously, the shepherd stepped into the shade. The temperature dropped at once, offering relief from the heat. He heard trickling water, faint but distinct. Hope leaped in his chest. With each step, the sound grew clearer until, rounding a bend, he saw a small spring gurgling at the base of a mossy boulder. It might have been the smallest water source he had ever laid eyes on, but it was miraculous in this parched land. Eagerly, he waved the horse forward. Though it stumbled, the promise of water drew it on. While the horse drank, the goats crowded around, fighting for a turn. The shepherd checked for signs of other visitors, footprints, dung, snapped branches. He spotted only the faint tracks of small antelopes, no fresh human prints. Still, he pressed his palm to the moist boulder, imagining how comforting such coolness would feel against the horse's wounded skin. Before attempting any further exploration, he resolved to rest here. The horse needed more than a moment's drink. It required time to gather strength. So they lingered in the cool canyon, the shepherd washing the horse's sores once more and offering a handful of feed from his dwindling pouch. His goats roamed in a tight circle, nibbling stray shoots of grass near the water. Though the place was stark, there was a solemn beauty in the canyon's towering walls, as if they shielded them from the world's harshness. The shepherd closed his eyes, thinking of the rumors he had clung to. Perhaps the outpost lay on the far side of this gorge, or perhaps it existed only in rumor. Either way, his course was set. He would keep going. The canyon walls rose like silent guardians on either side, blocking the worst of the sun while trapping a curious stillness. The shepherd paused near the spring, refilling his goatskin pouch with the thin ribbon of clear water that trickled along the rocks. The battered horse stood close by, still trembling at the knees, but the cool shade brought noticeable relief. Now and again, its head bobbed, as if dozing on its feet. The goats, made bold by thirst, jostled one another until they could drink their fill. Watching them, the shepherd felt a flicker of gratitude for such small mercies, a hidden water source, a temporary sanctuary. He ran a calloused hand through the horse's tangled mane. It was caked with dust and sweat, but underneath, he sensed the faint warmth of renewed life. Strange how quickly he'd grown attached to this animal. He remembered the day he left home as a boy, not much older than 12, leading goats across a windy plateau. Back then, he had felt alone in a boundless world. Yet here he stood, older, but still chasing uncertain horizons, feeling a swell of responsibility for a creature no one else had wanted. Perhaps that was the thread linking them, two souls wandering the vastness, drawn together by shared misfortune. After a while, he led the horse to a smoother patch of ground, where shards of sunlight fell through a crack in the canyon wall. The warm rays felt soothing rather than oppressive, offering just enough heat to chase away the chill in the shade. The horse sniffed at the damp earth, testing the minerals with tired curiosity. Nearby, the goats flicked their ears, uneasy in this enclosed space, but they stayed close, trusting in the shepherd's presence. Above, narrow bands of sky revealed fleeting clouds that drifted like silent ships across a pale sea. The shepherd rummaged in his leather pouch for any remaining scraps of food. He found a few meager grains and an extra strip of dried fruit. Splitting them in half, he set the first portion on his palm, extending it toward the horse's muzzle. Though clearly hungry, the animal ate slowly, as if tasting each morsel. The shepherd chewed the second portion without complaint, forcing himself to savor what little nourishment he had left. With luck, they would press on and perhaps find the outpost by tomorrow or the next day, if it even existed. Once the horse had eaten, the shepherd checked the injuries once more. The sores were still red and raw, but no foul odor suggested infection. Carefully, he washed them with the cool spring water and tore a strip from his own tunic to make rudimentary bandages. It was a pitiful effort, yet the horse stood patiently, as though grateful for any gesture of kindness. The shepherd smoothed a hand over the makeshift wrappings and sighed, reminding himself that they had come a long way. He could almost see hints of a healthier creature behind those sad eyes. By midday, they ventured deeper into the canyon, following the trickling stream in hopes it might lead them to a broader watercourse, or a path out. Slivers of sunlight danced on the rock walls, revealing lines and striations carved by ancient floods. Now and then, the shepherd spotted small, cave-like openings, but they were too dark to explore without a torch. Instead, he focused on finding a navigable trail. The horse limped along, hooves echoing on the stony ground, while the goats hopped nimbly around boulders. The air smelled of damp rock and lichen, a welcome contrast to the dusty plains they had left behind. After turning a corner, they stumbled upon a wider passage where the stream pooled into a shallow basin. The shepherd's heart soared at the sight. Enough water to let the horse drink freely, perhaps even enough to wash its entire coat. He signaled the goats to stay back, wary of letting them muddy the water too quickly. Then, with gentle insistence, he led the horse forward until all 4 hooves stood in the basin. The horse lowered its head and drank, each gulp reflecting an animal's raw will to survive. A faint breeze rustled the tuft of hair around the shepherd's face, carrying a coolness he couldn't recall feeling in weeks. Gratefully, he knelt by the basin, scooping water onto the horse's back. Dust and grime washed away, revealing the bony outline of its ribs. He felt a pang in his chest. Even if they made it to the outpost, would the caretakers be able to nurse this horse back to health? He didn't know, but the possibility kept him moving. Hours slipped by in careful exploration of the canyon floor. The shepherd found a narrow path leading upward, seemingly carved by centuries of rainfall. He decided to climb it, hoping to see beyond these rocky walls. Leading the horse was tricky. The path was steep and crumbling, and the goats proved restless, braying their dislike. Several times, small stones skittered away underfoot, bouncing into the ravine below, but each nerve-wracking step brought them closer to a vantage point. At last, he hauled himself onto a flat ledge, arms shaking from effort, staff clutched tight. From that perch, the land unfurled in a tapestry of rolling hills, red-brown earth and scattered shrubs. The canyon continued north, weaving between tall pillars of rock, but in the distance, the shepherd spied a faint blur that might have been cultivated fields. His pulse quickened. Could that be the settlement he'd heard rumors about? He stared hard, wiping sweat from his brow, convinced he saw faint rectangles suggesting huts or fences. A swirl of dust partly obscured it, yet the possibility was enough to stoke his resolve. With renewed determination, he guided the horse and goats back down the ledge, intending to press forward. As the sun dipped low, the shepherd realized they needed to stop before darkness swallowed the canyon. He found a spot beside a smooth wall of stone where the wind didn't gust so fiercely. There, he built a small fire from dried sticks and shrubs, coaxing the flames into a steady burn. Warm light danced on the canyon walls, and the gentle crackle soothed his nerves. He offered the horse another drink, then spoke in a low murmur. "Tomorrow we head for that place. If we're lucky, they'll have shelter for you. We'll find out if these tales are true." Night fell in quiet layers. The goats curled in a semicircle, lulled to sleep by the campfire's flicker. The horse stood with its eyes drooping, occasionally swaying but refusing to lie down. The shepherd remained awake longer than usual, gaze roving over the shadows. He recalled whispered stories of leopards that prowled these rocky corridors, stealthy enough to stalk goats or even an injured horse. But the darkness offered only stillness, broken by distant dripping from the canyon's far end. Eventually, he drifted into an uneasy doze, staff still in hand. At first light, they broke camp, stamping out the last embers. The shepherd coaxed the horse to eat a few wilted leaves, then set off along the canyon's winding track. In some places, the path was so narrow the horse had to walk sideways, hooves scraping the stone. The goats bleated, unnerved by towering rock on both sides, but they continued dutifully, trusting the shepherd's lead. Fresh scratch marks marred the canyon walls, perhaps from baboons or other creatures. The shepherd's nerves tingled, urging him to stay alert. Rounding another bend, they emerged into broader daylight. The canyon widened, allowing in the full brilliance of the morning sun. And there, not far off, a dirt trail snaked across the earth. On the horizon, a cluster of simple buildings stood beyond a line of scrub. The shepherd's chest swelled with relief. Maybe this was the outpost he had hoped for, or at least some sort of settlement where he could seek help. He pressed forward, feeling his fatigue lighten with each step. The horse, too, seemed to sense a shift, lifting its head as if it, too, yearned for the promise of comfort. As they neared the trail, the shepherd spied small footprints, perhaps belonging to children, along with the imprints of donkey hooves. A good sign. People lived here, or at least passed through. The goats trotted eagerly as if sensing new grazing opportunities, but the shepherd's primary focus was the horse, still limping yet determined. Soon enough, a makeshift gate came into view, a simple wooden frame with a sign overhead. He couldn't read the faded letters, but he guessed it marked some official outpost or rest stop. Nearby stood a few huts of sun-baked clay. A tin roof glinted in the sun, and wisps of smoke curled from a stone chimney. Cautiously he approached, scanning for any sign of hostility. A broad-shouldered woman appeared from behind a hut, wiping her hands on a rag. She paused upon seeing this small caravan, one man, one wounded horse, and a flock of goats. The shepherd raised a hand in greeting. Though he rarely spoke with strangers, he sensed this might be their best chance. The woman narrowed her eyes, then lifted a hand in response. More people emerged, 2 men in simple tunics, a young boy balancing a bucket of water. In murmured voices, they conversed, clearly surprised by the arrival. The shepherd bowed his head, pointing to the horse's injuries, trying his best to convey his need. Though speaking in halting phrases, he repeated the word, "help." One of the men, perhaps sensing the urgency, hurried forward to examine the horse. He wore a wooden cross around his neck and introduced himself with a few clipped words. The shepherd didn't catch the name, but the gentle expression told him all he needed to know. He motioned the shepherd to follow, guiding them toward a pen behind one of the huts. Several other animals grazed there, a donkey, a pair of lean cows, and a goat or two. The woman disappeared for a moment, returning with a clay bowl of water. She set it on the ground for the horse. The shepherd's tension melted into a wave of relief. Something about this place, though small, radiated kindness. He watched as the man pointed to a shaded enclosure, urging the shepherd to bring the horse inside. While the goats milled about, nibbling at stray vegetation, the shepherd led the limping horse under the shelter. It was just a wooden roof supported by posts, but after days on the open savanna, it felt like a haven of promise. In the warm glow of late afternoon, the shepherd led his limping horse beneath the enclosure's simple roof, feeling an unexpected wave of relief surge through his weary limbs. The outpost's residents gathered at a respectful distance, their expressions marked by cautious sympathy. One of the men, tall and lean with gray at his temples, spoke softly in a language the shepherd only partly understood. Still, the tone felt welcoming. With a few gestures, they conveyed that water and feed would be brought, and a place to rest was his for as long as needed. Several goats wandered over to sniff the resident animals, a donkey with long, tattered ears, and two thin cows tethered near a fence. The outpost woman who had first appeared stepped forward again, carrying a wooden bowl of mash. She set it down next to the horse's muzzle, then offered the shepherd a piece of coarse bread. He bowed his head in gratitude, cradling the bread as if it were a precious gift. Hunger tugged at him, yet his first impulse was to see if the horse could stomach some of the mash. The horse, uncertain, lowered its head and sniffed. A few weeks ago it had been forced to scrounge for tufts of grass in harsh conditions. Now it was being offered a bowlful of soft, grainy feed. Tentative at first, it took a nibble, then chewed. Relief flickered in the shepherd's eyes. He allowed himself a small bite of the bread, savoring the earthly taste that reminded him of simpler times. For a moment, everything else faded. The dusty journey, the memory of lions, the fear of the unknown, and he felt only gratitude for these strangers who extended mercy so freely. As dusk approached, the outpost residents lit fires around the communal area, illuminating the modest huts made of clay and corrugated tin. Smoke curled upward, dancing in pale ribbons against the darkening sky. The shepherd found himself guided to a humble shelter near one of the main huts, a lean-to with straw mats on the ground. He bowed and murmured thanks, pressing a hand to his chest in the universal gesture of appreciation. Though the local dialect eluded him, warmth radiated from their every action. At last, after seeing the horse settle into a quiet, munching routine, he allowed his eyes to close, sinking onto a straw mat. Exhaustion claimed him like a sudden tide. In the pre-dawn chill, he woke to the low murmurs of voices just outside. Pushing the door ajar, he peered into the gray light. A few of the outpost people were already tending to the animals. He spotted the tall, gray-haired man examining the horse's sores by the glow of a lantern, gently prodding the bandaged spots. The horse jerked slightly but did not lash out. The shepherd stepped forward, ready to intervene if needed. But the man glanced over with a reassuring nod. In the dim light, the shepherd noticed a simple cross dangling from a leather cord around the man's neck, likely a missionary or caretaker. The shepherd gave a faint smile, relieved to see that the horse was in watchful hands. He joined the man in tending the horse, trying to communicate what had transpired on the plains. Though words were scarce, he mimed the shape of a lion, then described how he'd found the horse battered and alone. The man listened intently, sometimes nodding, sometimes pausing to ask a question or two in a gentle tone. Bits of understanding began to bridge their language gap. The caretaker pressed a hand against the horse's flank, checking for fever. He looked at the shepherd and indicated that the wounds needed thorough cleaning, something more than a rag dipped in stream water. Then he beckoned the shepherd to follow. They crossed the compound to a small wooden shack where supplies were stored. The caretaker retrieved a clay jar of salve, likely made with herbs or local remedies, and some clean cloth. He handed these items to the shepherd, tapping the jar's lid as if to say, "Use this daily." The shepherd clutched the jar against his chest, nodding solemnly. A wave of relief rolled through him. At last, the horse might receive genuine care instead of the makeshift bandages he had crafted in desperation. Once back at the enclosure, the shepherd knelt beside his companion. The horse's ears twitched at the familiar scent of him. Patiently, the shepherd peeled away the old cloth strips, revealing patches of raw skin dotted with dried blood. The caretaker winced, but without hesitation, he helped wash the sores in warm water. Working with careful hands, they spread the salve over the wounds. The horse breathed heavily, muscles trembling at the sting, yet it did not try to pull away. When finished, the shepherd let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. This act of shared care made him feel less alone. No longer was it just him and the horse, adrift in a wide world. There were others willing to shoulder some of the burden. In the days that followed, a routine took shape. Each morning, the outpost residents would gather for a simple prayer, then fan out to tend their tasks. The shepherd, though shy, offered his labor in return for their kindness, helping fetch water from a nearby well and guiding his goats to graze in safe areas around the settlement. By midday, he would tend to the horses' injuries, applying the salve and removing any dirt that had accumulated. A few of the local children watched with wide eyes, fascinated by the foreigner who spoke in low, comforting tones to an injured horse. Sometimes they whispered to each other in excitement when the horse managed a more confident stride. The caretaker, whose name the shepherd eventually understood to be Mateo, took on the role of a gentle guide. He showed the shepherd how to wrap the horse's wounds more efficiently, how to mix bits of local herbs into its feed to soothe discomfort, and how to gauge signs of progress. Every so often, the shepherd heard snatches of another story, a rumor that someone at the outpost was skilled in dealing with traumatized animals. Yet this person had left on a supply run and would return within a week or two. The shepherd decided to wait, hopeful that additional expertise might help his horse recover fully. Meanwhile, the goats adapted swiftly to this new environment, wandering around the compound with mild curiosity. Now and then, they grazed close to the donkey and cows, blending into the outpost's daily life as if they belonged. The shepherd couldn't help smiling when he saw them doze in the midday sun, their coats cleaner and their bellies full. After so many days of travel, they too needed respite. One late afternoon, the shepherd ventured beyond the outpost perimeter to gather firewood, a small chore that he hoped would repay the settlement's generosity. As he scoured the scrubland for dried branches, his mind drifted back to the moment on the Savannah when the lions had circled, and that single roar threatened to swallow all hope. He shivered at the memory, though the sun was hot on his back. Without the shepherd's intervention, or perhaps some hidden grace, his horse might have perished in that dusty grass. And yet here they were, safe, among strangers turned friends. The shepherd sent up a silent thanks to whatever power governed such unlikely second chances. Upon returning, he found one of the outpost women gently brushing the horse's mane. The horse stood still, its eyes half-lidded in a state of calm he had rarely seen. The woman looked up and smiled in welcome, extending the brush for the shepherd to continue. He set down the firewood and took the brush, working through tangled strands and carefully removing mats of dirt. Underneath the layers of neglect, the horse's coat revealed faint hints of glossy sheen. Each stroke of the brush was like peeling away a layer of sorrow. He imagined the day this animal might gallop across open fields again, free of pain. After grooming, he offered the horse a bowl of mash enriched with herbs provided by Mateo. While the horse ate, the shepherd studied every subtle detail, the angle of its ears, the softness in its gaze, the steadiness of its breathing. If it startled less at shadows and wind-blown leaves, perhaps it was learning to trust once more. If the swelling around its sores receded, perhaps real healing had begun. Each day brought tiny changes that nurtured hope, and the shepherd clung to them like seeds planted in dry soil. Yet a flicker of worry remained in his heart. He wondered about the future. Eventually, he and his goats would have to move on, returning to the route that sustained them. Did that mean leaving the horse behind in these people's care? Or would he attempt to guide it onward, once it was strong enough to travel? He sighed, unsettled by questions that had no simple answers. For now, the best he could do was remain present and follow the daily rhythm of compassion and diligence. On the 5th morning at the outpost, the shepherd woke to the sound of distant hoofbeats. He stepped outside to see a group of riders approaching, traders perhaps, or travelers seeking shelter. The outpost gates swung open, allowing them entry. The riders wore dusty clothes, and one carried a sturdy pack horse behind him. Murmurs rose among the settlers as they recognized the group. Through gestures and scraps of language, The shepherd learned these newcomers had seen lions not far from the settlement. A ripple of unease passed over the outpost. Even now, that threat lingered at the edges of everyday life. The shepherd's thoughts spun. If the lion pride was still roaming near the route he would eventually take, traveling could be risky, especially with a recovering horse. His brow furrowed in concern. The outpost people too looked worried, yet their gazes held no panic. They had chosen this frontier existence, well aware that danger lurked beyond their fences. They depended on vigilance and unity to keep tragedy at bay. He admired their resilience, recalling his own precarious journey across the plains. That afternoon, Mateo approached with calm resolve. Through gestures, the caretaker indicated he wished to see how well the horse could walk. The shepherd nodded, understanding the time had come to measure the animal's progress. Together they led it from the enclosure, letting it test each step on firm ground. Though it still limped, the improvement was undeniable. No longer did it teeter after every few paces. A spark of relief lit the shepherd's eyes. The horse's ears swiveled, picking up the voices of children who watched eagerly. They cheered at each small triumph, as though celebrating a victory for all. Days passed in a gentle routine at the outpost, and the horse's condition steadily improved. The morning after Mateo's first thorough check, the shepherd awoke to the ring of distant bells, a sign that more travelers had arrived seeking supplies. Though he still struggled with the local dialect, he had gleaned enough to understand that this remote settlement served as a safe haven for wanderers. With each sunrise, the horse moved more freely, its limp less pronounced. After so many weeks of agony on the open plains, it now enjoyed warm water rinses and fresh mash laced with herbs. The goats too thrived under this community's watchful care, content to explore a designated pen near the outpost's fence. Watching them, the shepherd smiled, surprised at how swiftly this place had begun to feel like home. One afternoon, the shepherd ventured beyond the settlement to gather kindling. He observed the golden grass dancing in the breeze and recalled the horse's terror on the day he had found it surrounded by lions. Though comfort was now close at hand, the memory of those silent predators clung to him. Occasionally, a local would mention sightings just beyond the ridgelines, stirring old fears. At the outpost, a watch was posted each dusk to guard against nocturnal raids on livestock. But no one let such worries stifle the simple rhythms of daily life. In these routines, mending fences, hauling water, kneading dough, the shepherd found a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. One evening, as sunset lit the western sky in swathes of pink and orange, the residents gathered for a modest communal meal. They beckoned the shepherd to join, offering him a spot by a crackling fire. He hesitated at first, unaccustomed to such open hospitality, but their gentle insistence put him at ease. Children sat cross-legged around him, giggling each time he whispered thanks in his own accent. An older woman with bright, curious eyes ladled stew into wooden bowls. In halting phrases, she asked about the horse's progress, and the shepherd demonstrated how much steadier its walk had become. A warm glow of acceptance spread through his chest, a welcome contrast to the lonely solitude he had carried across the plains. Mateo approached with a battered journal in hand. Its pages were filled with sketches of plants and notes scrawled in neat rows. He turned to a drawing of a sturdy, thick-leafed herb, then pointed to a mortar and pestle in a corner. Nudging the shepherd gently, he indicated that if they could locate this particular plant in the wild, they could create a powerful salve. Intrigued, the shepherd nodded. He would do anything to hasten the horse's recovery. That night, as he drifted to sleep beneath a woven blanket in his lean-to, he imagined how it would feel to see the horse free of its limp and brimming with energy once again. At dawn, they set out, leaving the goats behind within the safety of the settlement. Mateo led the way, leaning on his walking stick, while the shepherd followed with a small satchel for collecting plants. They passed scrubby trees and patches of coarse grass. Rising heat baked the earth, chasing away the cool morning air. It was not long before they found themselves on a winding trail bordering a dry stream bed. Mateo scanned the ground for the distinct leaves he had drawn, and the shepherd, though new to such herbs, copied his careful searching. Overhead, the sky stretched cloudless, a pale vault tinged with the promise of midday's sun. After a time, they discovered a cluster of the needed herbs growing near the base of a boulder. The shepherd knelt, plucking each leaf with reverence. He recalled his first makeshift attempts to treat the horse: ragged cloth, muddy water, uncertain knowledge. Now, with Mateo's guidance, he could offer something truly healing. They filled the satchel with the fragrant plants, pausing once to quench their thirst from a canteen. As they started back, Mateo froze, pointing at a large, shallow imprint in the dust. The shepherd's heart lurched. Whether it belonged to a solitary lion or some other big cat, they could not be sure. Quickly they retreated, scanning every rustle of the wind-blown brush. Yet the savannah remained eerily calm, and at last they reached the outpost in relief. Wasting no time, they pounded the herbs into a pungent paste. The caretaker's clay mortar clacked with each downward thrust. Mateo, his brow furrowed in concentration, added a dash of salt and a careful sprinkle of dried flowers to refine the mixture. Steam rose gently as he stirred in warm water. Meanwhile, the shepherd hovered nearby, wringing his hands. He thought of the horse's injuries, the raw flesh and scabs, and prayed this new salve would erase that lingering pain. When the paste was ready, they hurried to the enclosure. The horse stood with ears perked, a testament to its growing strength. Upon the first dab of the salve, it flinched but did not retreat. Mateo smoothed the mixture across the healing sores, and the shepherd supported the horse's head, murmuring calming words. Around them, the outpost folk offered curious glances. An elderly woman dipped her head in satisfaction, as if she had seen countless animals nursed back from the brink. The shepherd exhaled, feeling that each smear of medicine also mended part of his own weariness. Word began spreading that another caretaker, rumored to excel at rehabilitating mistreated animals, was due to return soon from a distant supply run. The shepherd's pulse quickened each time the topic arose. Would this caretaker have insights on restoring the horse's strength? Eager for answers, he redoubled his efforts around the settlement. When not tending the horse, he helped patch fences or carry water, grateful that his goats seemed content among the other livestock. He tried out new words in the local dialect with the children, who giggled at his mispronunciations yet repeated them patiently until he improved. Finally, on a mild evening when the sky blazed in vibrant hues, someone announced that the caretaker had been spotted. The shepherd paused from brushing the horse's mane. Through the settlement's open gate, he glimpsed a small caravan, 2 donkeys burdened with supplies, a lanky man wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and a woman draped in a patterned shawl of brilliant reds and greens. The settlement stirred with excitement. The shepherd's heart thumped with anticipation. He watched as the woman, clearly recognized by the residents, handed the reins of her donkey to a friend, then scanned the courtyard. It took only moments for her gaze to land on the horse. Her eyes shone with interest, and she approached with a purposeful stride. Mateo greeted her warmly, exchanging a few quick words in the local tongue. With a small tilt of her head, the woman invited the shepherd to speak about the horse's condition. He did so in halting phrases, aided by Mateo's quiet translations. He described the day he found it, the confrontation with lions, their trek through the canyon, and the desperate arrival at the outpost. The caretaker, whose name was Marta, nodded thoughtfully. She touched the horse's neck, running her hand down its flank with gentle thoroughness. Sensing her confident energy, the horse barely shied. She tested its left foreleg, bending it slightly and waiting for any sign of pain. The shepherd watched every subtle movement, a lump forming in his throat. Would she deem the horse beyond saving? But after her examination, Marta smiled, meeting his eyes with a look of quiet reassurance. Through Mateo, she explained that the horse had come a long way already. A few more weeks of careful walking, targeted feeding, and daily salve applications might restore most of its strength. At once, the shepherd felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. Relief mingled with gratitude so profound, it nearly overwhelmed him. He bowed his head, clutching the rag he'd been holding. Marta placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression kind. With a gesture, she beckoned the shepherd to lead the horse into the yard for a slow walk. They circled once, then twice, the setting sun washing the horse's coat in soft gold. The limp was still evident, but no longer so severe. Children cheered at each measured step, their small voices carrying hope like a chorus of bright bells. That evening, after the caravan had unpacked, Marta joined the shepherd and Mateo by a communal fire. Though the shepherd spoke little, he listened intently as they discussed herbs, dietary needs, and the best ways to rebuild muscle. The flicker of flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and overhead, stars emerged in a velvet sky. Now and then, Marta glanced at him and smiled, as if urging him to believe in this future. Gradually, a conviction took root in the shepherd's mind. Perhaps when the horse was strong enough, it could live freely in a safe place rather than be cast out again onto the uncertain plains. The notion made his breath catch, an unspoken dream he scarcely dared to voice. That night he visited the enclosure one last time, crouching beside the horse. The world seemed hushed except for the soft shuffle of animals bedding down. He remembered the trembling creature he had found, half dead, left to the mercy of predators. Now it stood alert, ears forward, content to let him stroke its muzzle. He smiled, unable to express the fullness in his chest, and silently thanked every star overhead for the day's blessings. If fortune continued to guide them, a new chapter of genuine healing was about to unfold for them both. Dawn broke with a quiet grace, casting pale yellow light across the outpost yard. The shepherd rose from his straw mat, stretched his limbs, and found himself brimming with cautious optimism. Outside, Marta was already bustling about, checking on the outpost's animals. She paused at the horse's enclosure, beckoning him to join her. He stepped out, heart lighter than it had felt in ages, eager to hear any new advice she might offer for the horse's continued progress. While the settlement stirred to life, children yawning at doorways, a rooster crowing behind one of the huts, Marta demonstrated how to massage the horse's hindquarters to ease stiffness. She placed her palms gently on the muscle just above the leg, moving in careful circles. The shepherd imitated her technique, amazed by how responsive the horse seemed beneath his hands. No flinch, no sudden jerk. Instead, the horse merely blinked, as if discovering the pleasure of a soft, healing touch. Within minutes, a small audience of curious onlookers formed. 2 women carrying baskets of vegetables, a boy still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and even a gaunt older man who had once shown the shepherd where to gather water. They watched in respectful silence as Marta explained through Mateo's translations that consistency was key. Every morning and evening, she emphasized, tapping her own leg to illustrate the points of stress. The shepherd nodded, absorbing every detail. After finishing the massage, Marta guided them all to a patch of ground behind the enclosure where the horse could walk short distances in a gentle loop. The shepherd led it in slow circles, counting each step. The limp was apparent at first, but with repeated passes, the horse's gait steadied, as though remembering how to move confidently. Each time it completed a circle without faltering, onlookers murmured approval and the shepherd's chest swelled with gratitude. It was a small triumph, but one that hinted at bigger victories to come. They repeated this routine day after day, folding the massages into the horse's feeding schedule. Whenever Marta was free, she joined the shepherd, showing him further ways to flex the joints or apply gentle heat to areas still prone to swelling. At midday, the shepherd would fetch more of the herbal mix to refresh the salve. In the evening, after the communal supper, he'd walk the horse in the enclosed yard, counting steps under the moonlight. Though the horse still tired quickly, it recovered faster than before, a sign that its strength was slowly returning. Neighbors who rarely spoke before began greeting the shepherd warmly, commenting on how far the animal had come from its original pitiful state. With the horse's health improving, the shepherd found himself reflecting on his next move. Should he remain at the outpost until the horse was completely healed? Or should he resume his nomadic route with the goats once the horse could manage a slow trek? Late one afternoon, while reorganizing his supplies, he noticed how well his goats had adapted. They mingled easily with the settlement's animals, dozing in the shade without any sign of restlessness. He realized that, for the moment, they had no urgency to travel on. And what if returning to the open plains too soon placed the horse in danger again? That evening, he approached Marta and Mateo while they sat by a low table, sorting through sacks of grain. With measured gestures and a few words in their shared fragments of language, he conveyed his dilemma. He did not want to burden the outpost forever, yet he feared leaving before the horse was truly ready. Mateo smiled kindly, and Marta gave a thoughtful nod, tapping her chin. After a brief exchange in their native tongue, they urged him to stay as long as necessary. The outpost was no stranger to travelers who lingered, they assured him, and they believed compassion extended beyond a strict timetable. Touched by their kindness, the shepherd agreed. He would remain until the horse could move without risk of re-injury. Spurred by that decision, he devoted himself more fully to the settlement's life. When not focusing on the horse's exercises, he helped gather firewood, drew water from the well, and repaired fences. Once shy around strangers, he now found himself teasing the children, allowing them to lead the goats to fresh grazing patches. In return, the outpost residents invited him to share in their evening gatherings. Over shared meals of beans, flatbread, and occasional grilled meat, they listened to his halting stories about the horse's near escape from the lion pride. As days slipped into weeks, the horse's transformation became impossible to ignore. Its coat, once matted and dull, began to glisten with a hint of vitality. The sores on its back and sides shrank to pink scars that no longer wept. The limp, while still there, was softer, no longer the staggering shuffle it had been. Sometimes the shepherd allowed it brief trots around the pen, always ready to step in if it faltered. Each small step forward felt like a victory shared by everyone who had watched the horse's journey from despair to resilience. Rumors swirled that the lion pride had moved to a distant hunting ground, chasing migrating herds. Though no one could be certain, the outpost's watchmen reported quieter nights. Less howling, fewer strange shapes moving beyond the fence line. The shepherd kept that news in mind, pondering how it might affect his future. Perhaps if the lions truly had traveled on, venturing back to the plains would be less perilous. Yet the thought of leaving made a strange ache settle in his heart. He had grown used to waking each morning to neighbors' greetings, to Marta's and Mateo's warm nods, and to the children's laughter. One late afternoon, Marta suggested a short excursion beyond the settlement, a final test of the horse's endurance. The shepherd agreed, saddling his companion with a light blanket and gentle reins. He double-checked the stirrups, ensuring there was no pressure on healing sores. A small crowd gathered at the gate to watch them set out. Carefully, the shepherd nudged the horse forward. Though it moved with caution, the limp was scarcely noticeable unless one looked closely. Beside them, Marta rode a small donkey, prepared to offer guidance or assistance. The outpost fields, though limited, stretched to the edges of rolling grasslands that soon gave way to the open savanna. For the first 100 strides, the horse's ears flicked nervously, but the shepherd spoke in soothing tones, praising every smooth step. The outpost receded behind them, the huts no more than specks. They kept to a slow gait, scanning for any sign of weakness. Apart from the occasional stumble on uneven ground, the horse managed well, even seeming to relish the return to wide spaces. A gentle breeze rustled the grass, and the shepherd found himself grinning at the sight of the horse lifting its head, nostrils flaring at the fresh scents carried by the wind. They rode for about a half hour before circling back, not wanting to push too hard. When the outpost gate came into view again, the shepherd patted the horse's neck, a rush of pride coursing through him. Marta dismounted and gave him a hearty thumbs up. He dismounted as well, checking the horse's leg for any sign of swelling or renewed tenderness. Finding none, he allowed himself to exhale in relief. It was a small journey, but it proved the horse had grown strong enough to bear gentle travel. Over the next few days, the shepherd weighed his plans carefully. At meal times, neighbors asked if he would soon depart with his goats or if he intended to stay longer. He answered with polite uncertainty. Part of him longed to see new horizons, to follow the old routes that shaped his livelihood. Yet each time he imagined leading the horse into unknown territory, he felt a twinge of guilt. Hadn't this creature suffered enough? Would it truly thrive out there, or would it be safer in the outpost's protective environment? On a crisp morning, he sought Marta's counsel. She listened attentively, arms folded as he described the conflict in his heart. Through fragments of speech and Mateo's translations, she offered a simple perspective. The horse deserved a choice. If it had recovered well enough, it could learn to carry light burdens again and roam at his side. If, on the other hand, he decided to continue a nomadic life too rigorous for such an animal, perhaps there was another way. The outpost might accept the horse as part of its stable, allowing it to remain in a secure community. The decision, ultimately, was his to make, but it need not be made in haste. That afternoon, the shepherd spent hours alone with the horse, brushing its coat, walking it around the yard, letting it graze. Now and then he tried to envision them crossing the savanna together, sleeping under starlight, forging onward when water was scarce, ever wary of prowling beasts. Could the horse handle that life again? Its newly healed leg might still be fragile under long, punishing marches. The outpost, by contrast, offered safety, regular feed, companionship, and the watchful eyes of people who cared deeply for animals in need. As evening approached, he realized that either path carried weighty responsibilities. If he took the horse away and misfortune struck, he would bear the blame for risking its hard-won recovery, but leaving it behind felt akin to saying goodbye to a dear friend. He remembered the early mornings on the plains, the horse's labored breaths, and the unwavering trust that had grown between them. The horse had relied on him for survival, and in return, it had given him a sense of purpose he never knew he craved. At twilight, he asked for a little time to think. Marta and Mateo nodded, acknowledging the gravity of his choice. That night he sat under the stars by the fence, the horse drowsing not far away. A swirl of emotions coursed through him, affection for the creature that had come so far, gratitude to the settlement that made it possible, and the age-old restlessness of a man accustomed to wandering. He tilted his head back, gazing at constellations that never changed no matter where he roamed. In those distant pinpricks of light, he found a strange comfort, reminders that life's journeys loop and twist, yet certain truths remain constant. By the time he finally closed his eyes, he still had no definitive answer, but he sensed that when dawn broke, he would speak from the heart, trusting that compassion, both for the horse and for himself, would guide his final decision. At first light, the shepherd rose with an uneasy heart. counting his goats in hushed tones before walking to the enclosure where the horse dozed. The animal lifted its head at his approach, ears perking as though it sensed the unspoken conflict on his face. For a long moment, he merely watched it breathe, recalling how he'd once found it half dead on the Savannah. In this tranquil outpost, the horse had shed its worst fears and discovered trust, thanks to the steady kindness of strangers. Yet the shepherd's own life had been defined by constant movement, and he felt as though two roads stretched before him, one leading him away and another urging him to remain where he'd finally found community. He had gone to sleep uncertain whether to settle here, where work felt purposeful and neighbors offered sincere welcome, or to resume the travels he once deemed inevitable. Floating dust motes in the morning sun reminded him that time was slipping by. The outpost bustled with tasks, fields to tend, animals to feed, fences to mend. Far from burdensome, these shared responsibilities brought a sense of belonging he'd never known. As he stroked the horse's muzzle, he wondered if it too preferred this stable life. Would the animal truly flourish back on the plains, forever watching shadows for predators? Marta stepped into the yard, noticing his anxious gaze. She patted the horse's flank, reminding him softly that either choice, staying or going, carried no shame. Some residents had lived nowhere else, content within these walls, while others arrived with stories of distant lands. The horse reached its muzzle for Marta's hand, gentle breath stirring her sleeve. Its coat, once dull, now gleamed with tentative hope. Moved by the progress he saw, the shepherd mustered courage to speak with her, offering halting words about perhaps remaining at the outpost, if it would benefit the horse. Mateo came to help translate, and the shepherd described his skills: goat herding, a strong knowledge of survival, a willingness to learn new ways. Marta listened, nodding thoughtfully as she explained that each member contributed a portion of what sustained the group. If he stayed, he would be expected to labor diligently, just as he already had. The shepherd glanced at the horse, imagining a future where they could remain side by side, safe among friends. Before Marta could respond, a distant shout echoed from the settlement's gate. Two riders appeared on the horizon, pushing their mounts hard. Alarm swept through the outpost. The riders, dusty and breathless, spoke in hurried tones, gesturing toward the Savannah. Though the shepherd caught only fragments of their dialect, he recognized the words for lion and attack. Tension crackled like a spark. Children were swiftly ushered indoors while men and women grabbed tools or makeshift weapons. In a heartbeat, the calm morning turned into bristling alert. The riders explained that a small caravan had been attacked at dawn, losing animals to prowling lions. Instantly, memories of the day he'd rescued the horse flooded the shepherd's mind. His heart pounded. If the pride had indeed returned, would it hunt near the outpost again? Mateo put a steady hand on the shepherd's shoulder, indicating that a team of experienced riders planned to help any stranded survivors, while the rest guarded the settlement. Marta pulled the shepherd aside, eyes full of concern. She suggested he remain here with his recovering horse, where both would be safe from renewed danger. But the shepherd felt compelled to help. He recalled the terror in the horse's eyes before he'd intervened, and he could not stand idle knowing someone else might be in the same peril. Gesturing firmly, he asked if Marta would watch over the horse while he rode out. She hesitated, then nodded, promising to care for it as if it were her own. Securing a crude spear and a small pack of supplies, he joined the rescue group at the gate. A swirl of dust rose under the hooves of their horses and donkeys. Fear gnawed at him, but so did determination. Soon the outpost lay behind them, shrinking in the shimmering distance. One of the riders pointed to scattered debris on the trail, broken crates, footprints zigzagging in alarm. Vultures circled overhead, a silent omen of danger. The shepherd's stomach turned. As they advanced, he spotted unmistakable paw prints pressed deep into the dusty earth. A prickle of dread ran up his spine, recalling the overwhelming tension of that first encounter with lions. They pushed on until they reached a narrow ravine where brittle shrubs and rocks provided scant cover. A cry echoed, faint but urgent. The riders fanned out, calling for survivors. The shepherd's heart hammered. Behind a toppled cart, they found two travelers, an older man clutching a wounded leg and a young woman leaning over him. At the sight of rescuers, relief flooded their exhausted eyes. Quickly, Mateo and the shepherd helped them to a safer spot. The donkey that had stayed with them was trembling, ears pinned back. Though they heard no immediate growling, fresh claw marks scored the earth. The lions could be near. The group set a makeshift barricade around the broken cart, offering water to the weary donkey. One rider bandaged the older man's leg, while another scouted the perimeter. The shepherd was reminded of the day he'd first knelt by his wounded horse, feeling helpless yet determined. That same urgency gripped him now. No one deserved to be left to a lion's mercy. Just then, a low rumble emerged from the brush. The rescuers stiffened, hands tightening on weapons. A heartbeat later, a lion exploded into view, roaring at a rider who tried to block its path. Horses squealed, men shouted, and chaos erupted in the haze. Adrenaline surging, the shepherd thrust himself forward, spear angled to distract the beast. Another rider yelled, waving a torch. The lion snarled, hackles raised, but the combined threat of multiple defenders forced it to back off. It prowled in a half circle, tail lashing the dust before vanishing into the undergrowth. Silence descended, punctured only by the ragged breathing of spooked animals. There could be more lions waiting. Nobody dared relax. Carefully, the rescuers gathered the injured travelers, then retreated from the ravine in a tight formation. They had done what they could, secured 2 lives from imminent peril. It was late afternoon by the time they returned to the outpost. Weariness etched every face, but the travelers were safe and no lives were lost. Relief rippled through the settlement as children peered out from doorways. Marta hurried to check the wounded man's leg, guiding him to a sheltered mat. The shepherd lingered a moment, letting the images of the lion's lunging form settle in his mind. He shivered, recalling how fragile survival could be. Then he hurried to find his own horse. True to her word, Marta had arranged extra feed and a gentle hand to look after it. The horse whinnied softly at his approach, ears flicking forward. In that moment, the shepherd knew he could not bring himself to risk the horse's well-being on those dangerous routes. The memory of the lion's roar, the savage gleam in its eyes. He never wanted to see the horse cower like that again, nor see it threatened by the wilderness it had once narrowly escaped. He stroked the horse's muzzle, deciding that he would remain at the outpost, if they'd have him. This place had proven that compassion and cooperation could keep the most vulnerable creatures alive. That evening, once the injured travelers had settled and the rescue party had shaken off their fear, the shepherd asked Marta and Mateo to gather the others. With nervous energy, he stood by the horse's enclosure and, in a mix of gestures, broken dialect, and Mateo's translations, declared his intention to stay. The horse would not be parted from its newfound sanctuary, nor would he abandon this settlement that had shown him and his companion true kindness. Smiles brightened weary faces. An older woman placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, murmuring words of welcome he could not fully understand yet felt to his core. He saw, in the horse's calm eyes, a reflection of his own decision. The day after he announced his choice to remain, the shepherd awoke earlier than usual, stirred by a rare sense of certainty. Outside his lean-to, dawn had barely touched the sky, but the settlement was already gently buzzing. A few people moved about, lighting small fires for breakfast, while distant goats bleated in half-sleep. He stood for a moment, inhaling the crisp air, recalling how different this life felt compared to the solitary treks he once knew. It was a new chapter, one he hoped would bring the horse the security it deserved, and grant him a place of belonging he had never fully imagined. Stretching his stiff muscles, he headed straight for the enclosure. The horse was awake, ears forward, calm yet alert. The shepherd let himself in, mindful of the early hush. He stroked the horse's neck, marveling at how much healthier it looked compared to the pitiful creature he had rescued. A soft nicker escaped its throat, almost a greeting. He smiled, murmuring promises about tending its leg, making sure the limp soon vanished completely. There was no rush now. He could pour his devotion into each step of its recovery. Matteo and Marta soon appeared, exchanging greetings with him in gentle voices. A light breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and warm maize, making the morning strangely comforting. Together they ran through the usual routine, massaging the horse's leg muscles, checking for any swelling, then letting it walk in slow, measured loops near the fence. A small cluster of children watched, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Each time the horse completed a circuit without stumbling, they clapped softly, as though cheering on a dear friend. By midday, the shepherd had settled into a series of chores he never would have pictured himself doing months ago. He joined other residents in harvesting small crops of vegetables near the outpost's eastern edge, carrying water to help the plants survive under the scorching sun. Despite the repetitiveness, he found solace in the straightforward labor. The entire community worked side by side, each pair of hands essential. In the lull of the afternoon, he paused at the well, looking across the plain that stretched from the settlement's boundary. He remembered the lion attack all too vividly, the flash of claws, the savage roar. His heart squeezed at the thought that, if not for this sanctuary, his horse might once again face mortal danger out there. That evening, a gentle hum filled the courtyard as everyone gathered to share news, trade laughter, and enjoy simple fare. Children chased each other with squeals of delight, weaving among the animals with carefree abandon. The shepherd sat on a smooth wooden stool, the horse just a short distance away beneath the enclosure roof. He noticed how a few older folks approached it now, offering scraps of carrots or simply stroking its mane. The horse, once so fearful, accepted the attention, even nudging at a small boy's outstretched hand. Witnessing that tenderness, the shepherd felt a wave of pride, tempered by humility. They had saved this animal, yes, but in many ways it had saved him too. The following morning, the shepherd tried an experiment. He gently placed a lightweight pack across the horse's back, nothing more than a small cloth bundle holding straw, just to test whether the creature could bear weight beyond a saddle blanket. The horse tensed slightly but did not flinch away. Marta and another caretaker hovered close, should any sign of strain appear. Step by step, they led the horse in a circle, monitoring its reaction. Although the limp was still present, it bore the extra weight without distress. Encouraged, the shepherd resolved to continue such exercises daily. Over time, the horse might regain the strength once stolen by harsh abuse and heartbreak. In the days that followed, the shepherd's new role expanded. Whenever travelers arrived, he helped them stable their animals, showing empathy for any horse or donkey that displayed fear or fatigue. People soon realized how naturally he soothed anxious beasts, and they called him over when an unsettled mule refused to enter a pen or a panicked donkey needed a calm hand. His gentle demeanor became known among the outpost's visitors, and some jokingly said he had the gift of speaking to hooves. He smiled bashfully at such praise, but welcomed any chance to repay the community that had embraced him. Meanwhile, the horse's improvements became impossible to ignore. Its formerly protruding ribs were filling out thanks to generous feed and the freedom from constant fear. The old wounds on its back and flanks, once raw and festering, had shrunk to faint scars. At times, the shepherd allowed it brief trots, always careful not to push too far. He reminded himself of the early days when the horse could barely walk without collapsing. Now it lifted its tail in flicks of contentment, sometimes breaking into a short, joyful canter within the enclosure. Children gathered on the fence, squealing whenever they saw it move with grace. Those glimpses of renewed vitality lit a spark in the shepherd's heart. Though he remained adamant that returning to a nomadic life was too risky, the horse deserved some measure of freedom. One morning, he shared this desire with Marta. Through a patient exchange of words, gestures, and Mateo's help, they devised a plan. They would construct a larger pen near the outpost's eastern boundary, offering the horse enough room for a regular gallop without exposing it to external threats. The shepherd volunteered to do most of the labor, enlisting a few strong residents to bring posts, wire, and planks. The construction began under the dry season's relentless sun. Sweat beaded on the shepherd's brow as he dug post holes with a sturdy shovel. Others pounded stakes into the ground, forming a broad rectangle. Day by day, the pen took shape. At night, by the fire's glow, they patched each seam in the fence with care, ensuring no wild predator could slip inside. For the shepherd, it became more than a project. It was a statement of hope, an assurance that the horse would not be forced to live in fear. When the pen finally stood ready, the entire settlement turned out to watch the horse's introduction to its new playground. With cautious excitement, the shepherd guided it through the gate, letting it sniff the fresh boundary lines. The crowd hushed. After a moment's hesitation, the horse stepped forward, hooves stirring dust. It trotted the perimeter, ears pricked. Then, as if testing its own capacity, it broke into a quicker stride. A wave of delight rippled through onlookers. The horse moved fluidly, strong muscles powering each stride, barely any limp. The shepherd felt tears threaten to surface. He pressed a palm against his chest, wordlessly giving thanks. From that day on, the horse spent mornings in the new pen, galloping until it tired, while afternoons were reserved for gentle rides and continued therapy. Neighbors passing by often paused to admire how far it had come. A few older men recalled seeing such transformations only rarely, usually at the hands of experienced ranchers or healers. Yet this horse had thrived thanks to an unlikely alliance. A wandering shepherd, a supportive outpost, and a caretaker named Marta with a gift for healing. Word spread to nearby settlements. Sometimes visitors arrived just to marvel at the beast who'd survived a lion's jaws and found a second lease on life. Under the star-filled skies, the shepherd sometimes found himself in quiet conversation with the horse, speaking softly of gratitude and duty. Though the horse could not reply, he sensed an unspoken bond. Before, he had believed that destiny chained him to a life of isolation, moving from one patch of grass to another, forging no true relationships. Now he saw that all living beings, human and animal alike, could forge deeper connections if only given patience and kindness. The outpost had shown him a different way. A community of open hearts, each person and creature adding a strand to a shared tapestry of care. As the weeks turned into months, the horse achieved an almost complete recovery. Its scars remained visible reminders, but no longer the center of its existence. It ran with confidence and stood alongside other animals without fear. The shepherd, once torn between traveling on and staying, no longer questioned his choice. He belonged here. He realized, too, that the children who followed him around had begun calling the horse something in their local language, an affectionate name meaning star, perhaps in tribute to the bright spirit that guided it back to life. The shepherd embraced that name, whispering it whenever he approached, watching the horse's ears flick in recognition. Yet there was one last piece of closure he sought. The memory of the lions still weighed on him, not because he blamed them. They were creatures following their instincts, but because the horse's nightmares sometimes returned. In the darkest hours, he would hear the horse snort and jostle in its stall, as though reliving the terror of being surrounded. The shepherd would rise, calm it with whispered reassurance, and stroke its mane until the trembling ceased. In these moments, he reflected on how raw fear could linger, even when wounds healed. Perhaps in time, the shadows in the horse's mind would fade, replaced by the security it had learned here. One quiet evening, as a gentle breeze carried the promise of cooler rains, the shepherd found Marta outside the enclosure. She stood by the fence, gazing at the horse with a contemplative smile. When he joined her, she spoke softly, referencing the horse's bravery and how it had learned to trust again. Then she nodded toward him, as if to say he too had found a kind of courage in choosing to remain. Their expressions were warm, though few words passed between them. In that shared silence, the shepherd realized that his wandering days had led him to a place of true purpose, and as he watched the horse canter through the pen, tail lifted high, he knew that both of them had at last outrun the ghosts that once threatened to consume them. On a cool morning, just before the rains were expected, the shepherd rose early and made his way to the enclosure. Low clouds stretched across the sky, promising relief from the heat. The horse, spotting his approach, let out a soft, whickering sound that felt like a greeting. It stood near the pen's far corner, mane ruffled by a gentle breeze, and watched him with steady eyes. The shepherd smiled, recalling how distant and uncertain their beginnings had been. Now, whenever he stepped into the enclosure, the horse showed no sign of anxiety, only calm trust, a bond forged through care and patience. That day, he and Marta had planned a ride across the nearer fields to let the horse experience open ground in safe proximity to the settlement. While everyone prepared for chores and breakfast, the shepherd fetched a sturdy bridle, patted the horse's back, and secured a light pack near its withers. Any heavier load might still strain the old injuries, but Marta believed a brief outing would test its stamina without risk. As the shepherd adjusted the tack, other residents gathered by the pen, eager to see this creature gallop beyond fences. Children whispered excitedly, remembering how frail the horse had once appeared and how now it shone in the early light. Marta joined him, leading a calm donkey by the reins. Together, they guided the horse beyond the gate and onto a well-worn path that meandered among sparse trees and patches of tall grass. With each step, the horse's hooves touched the earth confidently, no longer dragging or limping. A hush followed them as they set off. A few onlookers cheered softly, then returned to their routines. The sky above was tinted with a faint gray, but no thunder rolled yet. The shepherd relaxed into the horse's stride, trusting that this short venture would mark the final confirmation of its recovery. They traveled east, away from the deeper Savannah. The donkey carried small parcels of medical supplies and water, a precaution in case of surprise. Marta explained in short phrases that beyond a certain rise lay a wide patch of flat grassland, a place to let the horse run if it showed the right energy. The shepherd nodded, excitement sparking in his chest. He recalled the countless hours spent massaging sore muscles, cleaning old wounds, and coaxing hope back into the animal's eyes. Now they would see if that devotion had truly taken hold. When they arrived at the open field, the horse lifted its head, sniffing the light breeze. The shepherd eased his grip on the reins, allowing it freedom to decide. Without prompting, the horse began a lively trot, then shifted into a full gallop. Sunlight flashed off its dark coat, hooves thudding against the firm ground. The shepherd leaned forward, heart pounding with exhilaration. Months ago, the horse could scarcely stand. Now it surged across open land as if born for this moment. Marta, riding behind on her donkey, laughed in delight at the spectacle. Even from a distance, she could see the horse's powerful strides and the shepherd's broad grin. Eventually, the horse slowed, sides heaving from the unaccustomed sprint. The shepherd guided it back to where Marta waited. The donkey flicked an ear, unimpressed by the show of speed, but Marta's eyes danced with pride. Dismounting, the shepherd patted the horse's neck, praising it in a low voice that the horse seemed to understand. Yes, its breath came in labored puffs, but it stood tall, ears alert, radiating renewed vitality. The shepherd felt a faint sting of tears, overcome by how far they had come together. They lingered under a lone acacia tree, letting both horse and donkey graze. A few birds flitted overhead, drawn by the promise of damp earth before the rainy season. Marta unpacked a water skin, gesturing for the shepherd to sip. As they shared the drink, their eyes swept over the quiet fields, the outpost just visible in the distance. The shepherd thought about the lion attacks that had threatened travelers mere weeks before. Although caution still reigned, the settlement had remained safe, and the horse's nightmares now seemed to fade under the warmth of daily kindness. With each passing day, the memory of bared fangs and circling predators lost its grip on them both. By midday, clouds gathered more densely, prompting them to return. The horse kept a steady pace, barely favoring its once injured leg, which gave the shepherd renewed confidence. Even so, he decided he would not subject it to long journeys or heavy burdens. A stable life beckoned, a life free from the terrors of endless migration across predatory plains. If there came a time the horse showed it could handle extended travel, he might reconsider. But for now, the safety of the outpost, with its watchful people and broad enclosure, was more than enough. Along the path, Marta confirmed that the horse's performance boded well. She recommended continuing gentle rides in the mornings, building muscle slowly until it reached full strength. The shepherd nodded, grateful for her guidance. When they approached the outpost gate, a small crowd had gathered, apparently alerted by the deepening clouds overhead. A few droplets of rain began to fall, spattering the dusty ground with dark polka dots. Someone opened the gate, beckoning them inside, and the shepherd urged the horse forward at a quick trot. They reached the enclosure just as the rain grew steadier, the pungent smell of wet earth rising all around. People hurried about, gathering laundry from lines, tucking tools under shelter. The shepherd dismounted, leading the horse into its covered stall. Raindrops sparkled on its coat, and the horse flicked its mane in evident pleasure, as if welcoming the refreshing coolness. That evening the skies opened fully, drenching the outpost in a mild downpour. Residents huddled indoors, sharing warm stews and laughter. The shepherd found a seat by the open doorway of the communal hall, from which he could see the horse gazing out at the falling rain. Memories surfaced, visions of scorching sun, dusty throats, and that desperate day when everything hung in the balance. He sighed, reminded of the fragility of life, yet soothed by the knowledge that compassion could tip fate toward mercy. Marta joined him with 2 steaming cups of spiced tea, placing one gently in his hands. With quiet satisfaction, they watched the world glisten under the blessing of water. Word spread that after the rains, new patches of grass would sprout around the outpost, ensuring ample grazing for the goats, donkeys, and the horse. The shepherd realized that, while his goats might roam further each day, he and the horse no longer needed to chase distant horizons. The old pattern of constant migration had given way to a deeper calling, nurturing and protecting a life once nearly lost. By accepting a fixed home, he had found what he never knew he craved, a place where neighbors stood side by side and where an animal's suffering was met with immediate care. In the hush of the evening, he felt that truth settle in his bones, as comforting as a lullaby. In the weeks that followed, the outpost thrived under the gentle rains. Vegetation revived, animals grazed happily, and the horse's strength reached a satisfying plateau. Some mornings the shepherd tested longer rides, cantering along the perimeter of the settlement with a sure-handed grip on the reins. The horse responded with enthusiasm, each stride carrying it further from the shadows of its past. Townsfolk watched, waving from their gardens or from the well. Children squealed and ran along the fence, cheering as though witnessing a grand parade. Each ride ended with the horse returning to the enclosure, calm and collected, as if the outpost had become its permanent anchor. Late one afternoon, after a productive round of chores, the shepherd found himself standing by the horse under a brilliant sunset. Streaks of tangerine and violet draped the sky, reflecting in the horse's dark eyes. He traced his fingers over the faint scars, remnants of what once threatened to break its spirit. Yet the horse stood tall, ears relaxed, head held high. The shepherd pressed his forehead to the horse's cheek, murmuring soft thanks. Thanks for surviving, for trusting him, and for teaching him the meaning of hope. Around them, the outpost air hummed with quiet contentment. Goats bleating softly, neighbors exchanging end-of-day greetings, a timeless lull of belonging. Though life would always hold perils, lions in the distance, storms on the horizon, this place and the bond he shared with the horse offered a lasting shelter from fear. He had discovered that destiny was not fixed. A single act of mercy in the face of danger had led to a home built on solidarity. Each day reaffirmed that the world was vast enough for second chances, no matter how hopeless a situation first appeared. With the sun dipping below the land, the shepherd rested a comforting hand on the horse's mane, thinking about how far they had traveled together. And as night fell, stars emerged, shimmering like the promise of renewal for every living soul willing to answer the call of compassion.